Axel is convinced the wreckage is UB-154, but it's in condition. Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Kavanaugh, and I'm considering running for president in 2024. I don't have any, or I've never held public office. I do have some political background. Spent the last 22 years in a third-party group. As a matter of fact, I ran for Congress back in 2000 out in Eastern Pennsylvania. Ran for the U.S. House. But I've been a studier of the government since the early 1990s, for the most part. Largely after the Waco debacle out there and the Branch Davidians and all that nonsense. That kind of woke me up to what our government was actually doing. That was murder, by the way. But I'm starting to open up some podcasts here, and I'm thinking about a variety of approaches, and at least I'm going to start with this one. This just being constitutional education. And I think I'll start off with, why are we keeping on electing kings instead of presidents? Is kind of like the primary topic. This is the year 2020, so we've got the Trump and Biden election thing going on here. Trump, of course, is running on his laurels, and Biden has got his 30-item list of things that he'll do when we elect him to be king. And that's really my point. This is what we do every time we have a presidential election. And it's even more notable when you've got a non-incumbent, such as like in 2016, we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump running. So both of them had their 30-item list of things that they were going to do once they were elected king. And these kings, or in Hillary's case, queen, whatever you want to call it, would execute these because they now have a mandate from the people by having won the election. I'm old, obviously. I've got some years under my belt. I was certainly raised on the playground under the adage of majority rules. And it wasn't until more recently that we started hearing elections have consequences. Neither one of these actually apply to the United States Constitution, and they should not apply to the election for the President of the United States. Yes, elections have consequences and majority rules as far as winning the office and taking the seat, but it doesn't say that you can do everything that you said you were going to do. Because for that, you need to have the constitutional authority to do these things. According to the Founding Fathers, they established this Constitution to be a restrictive document directly for this central government that they were creating. They had seen what could be done from the distant lands of Great Britain under King George, and they didn't particularly care for what they lived under then, so they wanted to make sure that this new central government had specific restrictions to what it could do, as opposed to trying to come up with the list of hundreds of thousands of things that it cannot do. It's easier just to say, you know what, these are the things that we're going to allow you to do. And if you want to do anything more, here's an amendment process, because we probably didn't see 100 years into the future, like for flight or automobiles even. So they provided an amendment process in the Constitution so that as time went on, technology grew, the Constitution could be amended at the people's will to allow this new central government to do what it now might need to do. Amending the Constitution never came without it being easy. If you know what the amendment process is, and you can skip forward a minute or two, actually just a minute maybe, because I'm just going to go through it quickly. The amendment process, well, actually there's two ways, so it might be a couple minutes. There's one way that the way it's always been done is a bill passes or an amendment passes through both chambers of Congress with 2/3 of that chamber approving it. In the Senate, that's specifically 67 now, because it has to be above the 2/3 mark, which means 66 doesn't get there, 67 does. The House membership's currently 455. I'm not going to do the math, but obviously it's 30 something, 303 maybe, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But it has to pass through both chambers of the Congress, both the House and the Senate, without changing any verbiage now at this point. They can't rewrite it in the Senate and say, we like it this way. Because if they do it that way, you got to send it back to the House. Because the amendment has got to go unchanged. throughout the entire process. So now the Congress has potentially passed an amendment. Now that same amendment with all the same unchangeable verbiage might be important for the 16th Amendment. We'll look at that, down the road. But that amendment then is sent out to all the 50 states, and their state legislatures then have to approve it for it to become an amendment. And it requires 75% of the states to approve this amendment. Currently, that count is 38 states have to approve an amendment to the Constitution. The founders knew the importance of the Constitution of the United States. When our nation was founded, for any member state to become part of the Union, it was required that they actually ratify the entire Constitution. That was a tough road to hoe. A whole bunch of letters had to be written to the state of New York because they were thinking about being an independent empire. Called Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers, by the way. But so they saw the potential of a king, a ruler, a president, then swaying enough congressional votes to violate the Constitution without caring about, the actual ratification of his actions, the approvals of them. So they didn't just say that, the President of the United States can, or the Congress can do what they want. The Congress had written into place the Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers of Congress. Once again, that's Article 1, Section 8. It lists the 16 things that Congress can do, And only one of them actually extends into the states themselves, and that's the post office. Nothing else that Congress does can impact the states directly. From the enumerated powers of Congress. Gee, I'll bet that's an eye-opener for some of you. But if that opens your eyes, let me remind you, it was about 6 years ago, I want to say, 6 or 7 years ago, something like that, that federal government mandated that all the states adopt a drinking age for alcohol of age 21. The federal government doesn't have the authority to make that mandate. They know that. So what they did instead was they used a trick they've used a number of times, something I call extortion, and applied the federal interstate highway funds, as a tool of extortion, and told the states that they're not going to get any of these funds distributed to them unless they adopt this law that we passed in Congress. Like I say, that was, I want to say 2013 or so. It was within the last 10 years, I believe. You can look it up, the drinking age thing. But that just goes to show you that indeed Congress does not have any authority inside the states. They have to extort their laws upon the states. Now I say that, and true, that is the case. That's the way the Constitution reads. And I'm just going to go this direction for just a moment. I remind you, Obamacare was passed by Congress. So it doesn't apply to the states either. And Tom is someone with the experience to know. But even at that, Obamacare actually required an amendment to an act, even though in reality, all Congress did was pass regulatory laws. It didn't create anything new particularly. So in that aspect, no amendment was required. But that's a topic for a different time. I'll talk about Obamacare in its own issue. So what we're talking about is how segueing to the idea that this year's presidential election is between Donald Trump, who's got a ongoing platform, Make America Great Again, did a good job, Now we got to do it again, But he's done what he's going to do, and he's just simply going to repeat doing what he did. So we know what that's about. But Biden's over here with his more traditional list of 30 things that he's going to do if he wins the majority, if he wins the Electoral College by 0.1%, right? 50.1% of the vote, and he's going to implement his entire left-wing action plan. The same would hold true for a GOP candidate. Just right now, that's Trump, and we know what his action plans are. So they're there. His 20 or 30 are there. We just already know what they are, and we've seen many of them in play. But at any rate, we elected a king when we elected Donald Trump in 2016 because he's carried out as much of his platform as the Congress would allow him to carry out. It's part of the check and balances, right? Is the congressional approval of presidential platforms. However, we know from our own experience, those of us that have got gray hairs now, been around long enough, but even at the beginning of Trump's own presidency, he also had a Republican-held House and a Republican-held Congress. And though he didn't seem to manage to get his wall funding pushed through, but he did get the pay or the tax changes that he wanted and other things because he also had a partisan Congress to support him. That's not a representative Congress. That's a bunch of partisans is what it is. We'll talk about elections also in a different segment and partisan impact on it. We're still in the amendment process, and we're going to spend this entire segment on it. We're not going to drift away. Most of Biden's platform, I've looked at it, is extra constitutional is what I like to call it, just to be polite. Unconstitutional is the short version. There's no authority for it is another version. But he's going to enact it should he become elected president and the American people also see the unfortunate change of hands of the Senate. I'm not saying this to try to get you to vote any direction whatsoever. I'm just trying to point out that a president with 50.1% of the vote, but also with the full approval, blind approval of Congress, without debate, without consideration of anything, are going to put some of these plans into effect. Free college, right? Free college, really? Without an amendment, you're going to use taxpayer funds because you have to pay for it. Nobody's going to, teach college for free. You have to pay for that. So the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for this. So you're going to have to raise taxes to fund just free college. Well, what's your target? Roughly 65% of the jobs in our nation don't require any college education. Right? So how are we going to manage that end of it? You're going to tax everybody as if everybody's kid's going to go to college and then just keep the change? Right? No, one way or another, you're going to be taxing everybody because the childless are going to be taxed too, and they're never going to use it. So that's pretty unfair of you, isn't it? This is why this thing needs to go through an amendment process, because you're going to be treating a whole lot of people unfairly with that. Which is why the amendment has to be passed in order for you to be doing these things. That's just one of your entire platform. You have to ask permission of the people if you, the government, are going to adopt new powers and authorities. And providing free college to the populace is a new authority. And it's going to require new taxes that we all have to pay. So you have to get it past us in an amendment process before you actually put that into effect. But again, we've become accustomed to just voting for a king. And if you can get enough votes through Congress to support it, you might be able to twist even a Republican Senate into saying, okay, fine, we'll give you that. You might be able to twist their arms into it without even changing the party control of it. Maybe he'll trade the wall for that. I don't know. But still, nonetheless, the point is that in this case, as in every other presidential election that I've experienced, whether they be two fresh opponents or an opponent fighting an incumbent, there's a list of 20 to 30 items that each candidate wants to do, and few of them are actually constitutional to do, and neither one of them will actually go through the effort of an amendment to approve their actions throughout the population as per the Constitution. So the amendment process, once again, an amendment has to pass through each chamber of Congress, both the House and the Senate, with 2/3 of the vote in each chamber, and then it has to pass 3/4 of the state assemblies of the member states at the time. Right now, that's 50 states, so that's 38 states have to approve it. That's not an easy thing to do. So they don't. They just simply enact their unconstitutional efforts. I started talking about the FDA, the EPA, the U.S. Air Force. These are things that we've simply accepted into our lives, but there's no place in the Constitution that says they should exist. I could go on. The FBI doesn't have any authority to exist. Of course, the CIA doesn't. Where did we approve these things? this NSA surveillance thing, the Patriot Act. Right? When do we approve the United States government intruding into our very daily lives, our bank accounts, right, our comings and goings? When did we, the people, say that they could do this? Well, we never have, because we've never asked. And they don't dare ask now, because if they ask now, that'll be admitting their criminal guilt for whatever period of time such law has been or agency has been in place. The FBI since what, the 1920s? By the way, on the note of the FBI, the United States Constitution allows for the provisions of United States Marshals. United States Marshals. There's no mention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, nothing close to it. That was created out of, I forget what administration. It's not important, but it was built in the 1920s, I believe. And that, of course, I mean, they were largely created to fight the prohibition, the rum runners, the Al Capones. This is really why the FBI was created, was to try to track those folks down. It was created out of thin air, no constitutional amendment, and not only have we been stuck with it, but we've seen its recent abuse by the outgoing president. You know, an abuse that has virtually disrupted the incoming president's entire first term. All unconstitutional efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens is we hear something good, and it sounds good, and we want it applied. So we vote for it in these presidential races. It has become up to we, the people, now to recognize what is an unconstitutional plank of a platform and point that out to the candidate, saying, this one you can't do. Right? And if you don't get it off of there, I can't vote for you. You know, because you can't just allow these kings to be elected to 51% of the vote and willy-nilly just invent stuff out of thin air and then force it upon we, the people. This leads to revolutions, people. This is the type of stuff that leads to war. So we really need to hold the feet to the fire, particularly on the presidential candidates, because they're the ones who want to be king, that their proposals must fall in line with the Constitution, or their entire candidacy needs to be placed at risk. You know, we need to just simply tell these folks, we're not going to take this. Right? We're not going to let you just make up rules as you go simply because you got elected by 0.1%. There are a number of things that can come to pass without necessarily, requiring an amendment. Usually those things would come from Supreme Court rulings. And we'll go into many of those as I continue to extend these podcasts out. And I promise you, when I start covering Supreme Court rulings, I'll be covering like one ruling per broadcast. But Supreme Court rulings can actually alter the role of the federal government. They shouldn't, but they sometimes do inadvertently. There's, of course, the minor alteration that their Obamacare ruling made. Said you can't call them fines, you can call them taxes. Now, that was wrong because, according to the Constitution, you can only tax without apportionment. And to tax the non-participants in Obamacare is only taxing certain people. And that's certainly apportioning a tax. So, John Roberts got it wrong. He's supposed to be an esteemed Supreme Court justice, but they're not looking at the Constitution anymore. So we have to wake up, America. We really have to do. We really have to do this. We have to start, looking these politicians in the eye and go beyond their initial swearing in oath of office. Yes, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution, yada, yada, yada. Now let me sign this violating bill over here. Oh, yeah, what were you saying again? Okay, well, don't worry about it. I won't violate the Constitution. Yeah, don't worry about it. Because that's what they do. It's really just about the only way to win election is to promise things that they shouldn't promise. Then they have to deliver on those promises once elected, if they're going to lose the next election. And all of this is to ascertain power and authority over we the people in an effort of their own personal greed for the most part. That's usually the case, is their own personal greed. But it's sad that we're actually all falling for this. We're voting in kings and allowing them to run, rampant through our Constitution, just not caring. A bull through a china shop. Well, I have a mandate from the people. They elected me president. Elections have consequences and majority rules, right? So you 49% can go suck your eggs. Well, like I say, this is not America, folks. This is a duopoly communist government, right? We were only given a choice of left or right. And they keep stretching us far left and far right, and they never patch the holes they leave in between. I said at the top of this that I'm considering running for president in 2024. I've been getting enough encouragement where I actually think I'm going to do this. So I'm going to spend the next several minutes just at least describing to you who I am, why I'm doing this, where I want to go with this. Once again, my name is Ken Cavanaugh. My political experience has been largely studying the government as well as studying the Constitution, going through both the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, that is. So I know how our founders thought when they wrote the Constitution. I have run for 2 political offices in my lifetime. In 1999, I ran for county commissioner in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It's the southeastern corner just outside of Philadelphia. And then a year later, in 2000, I ran for the United States House of Representatives, which at the time was the 13th Congressional District, which was largely the same county area. In the first case, I didn't make the ballot, so I was just a write-in. In the second case, I went through all the effort to get the long, drug-out petition signatures so that I could officially have my name on the ballot. In making it on the ballot, then, of course, I was by default invited to the debates. Of course, every major debate publicly invited me. And that was fun. By now, you might guess that I'm not a Republican nor a Democrat. I ran as a Libertarian then. I hold the Libertarian Party near and dear to my heart. They've got a lot of good things, in their platform. The Constitution is certainly one of them. So when I ran for Congress in the year 2000, I was running against Stuart Greenleaf, a Republican who was a state senator at the time, Pennsylvania state senator at the time, and Joe Huffle was the incumbent Democrat. Joe Huffle won re-election. I may have hurt the Republican a bit. I got about 1.7% of the vote. I forget what the tally was, but I will at least say pride enough that I got twice as many votes than I had registered Libertarians in my district. So I at least had non-Libertarians voting for me. I didn't really have a lot of time because I had to go through all the ballot access signature process, which is why I'm trying to get a head start on 2024. This is actually not an official announcement of my candidacy. Notice I said I'm considering running. If and when I actually make that decision, I'd likely actually to start my active campaign November 4th this year, the day after this year's election. I just figure I'll let these 2 bulls run through their china shop, and I'm not going to get mixed up in them. But I'm going to wait until the day after the next decision has been made, and then I'm going to start shooting for 2024. I can only hope that we actually still have elections by then. The way one of these parties is running, I'm not so sure that even elections will be permitted in 4 years' time. Making a state out of Washington, D.C. Indeed. It's directly in the Constitution. You can't do that. And the moment you try, I'm going to have Maryland and Virginia both sue you for the land themselves. That's the kind of president I'm running for. My platform is actually to restore the Constitution. It's a simple platform. As I was saying, I've read through the Constitution. I've read through the supporting documentation. I think I've got a pretty good handle on what the Constitution says and what its intent is. And that's really where I'm going to go down. I'm going to go right down the middle of the Constitution, saying this is what the federal government is going to do. It's exactly what's in the Constitution. Anything that's not there is going to be brushed into different directions. I'm not saying eliminated, just saying they're going to be brushed into different directions. The federal interstate highway system will be handed off to the states. Federal government doesn't build them, doesn't maintain them. They just simply redistribute the money. So we're going to stop that altogether, cut the middleman out. Board of Education will be collapsed almost immediately. The only purpose I see for a central decision-making process, at least K through 12, is to have a standardized high school diploma, testing requirements for high school diploma. That can be done on a 4 to 5 year forum basis, just by bringing in some various teachers every 4 or 5 years and reviewing it. We don't need to be spending money on that. Besides, there's no constitutional authority for it. The Department of Transportation will be dramatically reduced, pretty much eliminated, so it doesn't have interstate highways to maintain. The only part of the Department of Transportation that exists for any purpose that's in the Constitution is postal roads. And at some point during my presidency, we'll even address that part of Article 1, Section 8, and try to get rid of the postal roads part. Because we don't need the government in charge of postal roads anymore. Not the federal government. So like I say, these are the types of things that you're going to be getting from me on the campaign trail. There's going to be a lot of things, like I say, that are just going to be simply either cut back or transferred off into other hands. I'll give you another idea. The FBI, I'm going to reduce back to its initial charter and just saying you're allowed to be a national investigative encapsulation of data, so that the state of Illinois can find out that so-and-so did something in the state of New Mexico. You can be that sort of a liaison, but nothing more than that. The NSA will be put out of business. For the most part, that'll be dropped down to FISA warrant only. The idea that they've got data storage in Utah for every American is completely ridiculous, right? So that place will actually just be physically destroyed. I shouldn't say it that way. I'll find other uses for all that computer equipment, but it'll be completely erased, and reassigned, those computer elements into different projects, more useful things rather than just tracking American citizens. So these are some of the ideas that you're going to be hearing from me on the campaign trail. But I'm a centrist. I don't have any leanings towards the Republican or the Democrat Party specifically. In the long run, I like the Republican idea of when they keep talking about having a smaller government, though they've never made it so, but that's what they talk about. And I have always felt that freedom and civil liberties are important as well on the other side. But in order to maximize our freedom and civil liberties, we have to minimize government. So I've really leaned first to the Republicans to say, let's minimize government. And by minimizing government, we can therefore, by default, maximize our freedoms. And freedom takes on many forms. It's not just what you think about off the top of your head. Oh, I can do what I want. Not that you can't just do what you want. You can't damage property or injure people. Those are crimes. But other than that, you can certainly go out with purple hair. You should be able to start up your own business or anything like that. But freedom also comes in the form of being able to do those things. And the ability to do those things sometimes relies on having the cash to do it. And I want to start to close this 30-minute segment by just reminding you that every dollar taxed is a dollar taken away from your freedom. And I intend to reduce your taxes dramatically, at least at the federal level, by reducing it to its minimal form, the form that our founding fathers had intended to put in place for our country. We only need an international liaison there, somebody to defend our borders, someone to make sure we stay at peace, someone to make sure that the pirates don't interrupt our trade. That's really all we need at the federal level. We don't really need them to run the post office anymore. Once again, in closing, my name's Ken Kavanaugh. It's been wonderful spending this 30 minutes with you here today. I don't know how long this video stays in archive, maybe forever. This is video one of hopefully many. And I'm actually going to be opening up hopefully a weekly podcast called Twing, T-W-Y-N-G, This Week in Your National Government. Look for that soon. I'll be talking to you. Bye-bye.